what I'm looking for, and I'm sure this applies to many other hiring managers as well, or any other people that are in a position to influence hiring decisions, is when someone demonstrates a clear understanding of what's expected in the position that they're interviewing for, then you'd have done your job effectively. When you demonstrate that you know what it entails. So I can't stress enough how important it is to review your job posting several times before the interview. And if you didn't save it before it expired, sometimes I can tell that people probably haven't saved the posting because they have no idea what the job was for. That's a travesty. From PHI Media, I'm Gordon Thane, and this is episode 222, Perfecting Your Interview Technique. You're listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for all things public health and global health, from the Sustainable Development Goals to the social determinants of health, as well as interesting dialogues about the diverse career opportunities that exist in these fields. Remember to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify so other people like you can benefit from our content. Oh no, not another episode on job interviews. How much is there to know about how to navigate these successfully? Well, best practices are always evolving, and as you go through the interview process as a candidate or the person hiring, you learn so much. I've been on both sides, with more than 10 interviews for public health related positions as a candidate, and on the other side interviewing over 50 people as a hiring manager. And through both lenses, have observed during that time what works consistently. What you'll hear in this episode is mine and Purva's conversation about how to navigate this world of interviews, from making sense of job postings, doing your research, setting simple structure to answer interview questions, and making sure you finish off with a bang. So the first step, obviously you would have done a good job. You got an interview invite by email. Check your spam folders, people. I'm actually on a tangent. I wonder how many times I've gotten like an interview offer that went to spam.
Yeah, I don't check my spam. So
someone said it to me like a year ago, and I was like trying to open my spam for like the last 3 years just to see if I just have to know, did I get an interview for something and I don't know about it?
Honestly, with the amount of random applications you put through, Gordon, I feel like it's a high likelihood.
That would be, especially if it's something that I wanted. Yeah. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
And then they're not going to really bug you and follow up with you like a telemarketer, right?
No, they'll probably just be like, wow, this guy just doesn't even care.
Yeah, he's not interested at all. How dare he? But anyways, let's assume you did get the email and you're reading it. You're freaking out with your friends. You're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? The first thing that you probably would do is to book a time. So of the time options that they give you, try to book with enough time for you to prepare. But sometimes, Purva, that's not... You don't really get that much time, right?
Yeah.
When you get the interview offer.
One time I was asked to do an interview and I got the email on like the Thursday and the interview was on Friday. It was less than a 24-hour turnaround. Freaking out was an understatement, right, Gordon? I think I texted you freaking out as well.
Did you ever consider like saying, nah, let's do next week? Like, why did you ultimately accept that?
It was actually a job that I had been trying to secure for a bit. So it wasn't your usual, like, you applied and you got it. I'd been in the talks with this person for a while for this job. So I had an idea that the, interview kind of might have been a formality, but still it's an interview. You're not going to tank the interview even if you kind of have a job lined up. And also I had been waiting for a while, either way, not to hear back from the application, but for the posting to go out and all this type of stuff. It's just a long time coming. And I was like, I would like to get this started sooner rather than later. Yeah, so it worked out, but it was a freak fest for a bit.
But to be fair to you, I think because of the nature of how that unfolded, you kind of throughout the whole process were learning more and more about the project, the program, the organization that you'd be working on, right?
Yeah.
So like it wasn't like a new new thing in that you just started to prepare. Would you say that helped you out a bit?
Yeah,
The fact that
absolutely.
you were kind of preparing, kind of?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I knew a bit of the job obviously from when I had applied, but the general way the organization worked, the goals, and I knew what they were looking for from an ideal candidate already. So I kind of had all that prepared. I knew the background of the organization, the projects they do, who the people are. So I got to cut out a lot of research time on that front, and it was more of just like the part of preparing, tying my resume and experiences with the job posting requests and responsibility outlined that for the role. So that's kind of what I spent most of the preparation doing, which I think is the part that, at least from when I'm preparing for interviews, is what I spent the most time doing anyways. I know few people we know, LaShawn, spends a lot of time just in like looking up the organization and really getting all the deets on it. He barely really prepares for that responsibility checks and what you've like your tasks and your skill sets. I know Gordon, you and I spend a lot of time doing mainly that.
Yeah, his style is to say something surprising on page 52 of the strategic plan, and they're going to be like, oh my gosh, how did you know this? That's like LaShawn's
Yeah.
style.
It's not the usual way. If you have
Yeah,
that
a balance of both is probably
yeah.
where you should land. Like enough about the specific responsibilities on the job posting. That's something, Purva, too, is a big pet peeve of mine, being in a position where I'm interviewing people now and they come and it's clear that they haven't really read the job
Oh,
posting.
absolutely. Yeah.
The next step is dissecting the job posting. By your interview date, the job posting likely expired, so ideally you have it saved as a PDF. There are several ways that you can go about analyzing job postings, but what I mean is to first understand the position. What kinds of keywords are being repeated? Is there a term, phrase, or concept that you don't understand? Well, Google's your best bet, and make sure you do it to understand what those terms mean. It might not be explicitly asked in the interview, but maybe it can help you frame or formulate your response using the same terminology as them. It's very disheartening. As someone who's hiring, I want to make the process as easy as possible to find the best person for the job. So it's not about tricks or trying to throw people off. What's on the posting is what you'll be doing for the work, and I expect that when you come to the interview, you could speak on those things. If you haven't done them, you could speak on how what you've done in the past relates to what you'll be expected to do. And that's an inference you should make. I shouldn't be the one. There's been many times where I've had to look at a resume and try to envision how someone fits.
Yeah.
And like for 10 minutes later, I'm like, why am I hurting my brain trying to figure out how to put a square peg into a round hole?
Yeah. They should be
If
doing
you are
that
a
for
square
you.
peg
Yeah.
and you're trying to fit into a round hole, then you should be the one making that case, not me.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there. So, yeah, you can't say enough about reviewing a job posting thoroughly. If there's like a random term on there that you're not familiar with, you should probably Google it, right? So if it says like implementation research or implementation science,
Yeah.
know what that means, and know what that means in the context of the work,
Yeah.
right?
I even say like if you want to take it a step further aside from just meeting what they're looking for, like aside from just meeting those key points, say like it's a project management, you're like, oh yeah, I have project management experience, and you're always hitting that through every answer. You also want to look at the parts of the job posting that say it would be an asset to have, or individuals who have this like would be, like ideal or whatever. Look at those points and skill sets and see if at least, even with if you might not have 100% of it, but even if you have an idea, do a quick Google and see what exactly a certain skill set entails, and be able to twist it into your conversation in a way that like, oh yeah, I know a little bit about this, I'm a quick learner, I can easily get all of it if needed, but obviously don't lie immensely and say it 100%, you're an expert, but There's always some things you can kind of teach yourself. And if you can kind of catch on to some phrases and get like a little rundown 101 learning of something specific, just to prep yourself and take your answer from like 100 to 110%, I think that's always a good idea too.
Whether you have many or very few years of relevant experience, thinking through your key talking points can be very helpful. You ever notice that most stories on the news come down to a few sound bites? So that's why the guests try really hard to get their main points across in every question. Doing an interview for a job is very similar in many ways. But the goal here is having key talking points about yourself. These points should paint a picture of what I call a professional brand. So, to cap that off, I will say this. What has worked for me very well for positions that I've interviewed for is developing a professional brand. So what do you want to be known for, or what have you been known for in the past in your previous positions, and how it relates to this position? And that really helps you scope down, like, there's so much information in your head that you're trying to remember and trying to categorize. It gives you like a few key talking points to hone in on pretty much in all of your answers in different ways.
Yeah.
So what that looks like is, by looking at the job posting, maybe it mentions the word project management many times, right? Like Purva kind of alluded to there. In pretty much all of your answers, you want to demonstrate that you're an effective project manager, and project management is built on many different components, so you can express a lot of variety in your answers. Maybe it talks about communication, so you want to brand yourself as Mr. Communication, in my case, and have demonstrated examples for that. So I usually pick out sort of, okay, their ideal candidate has these 3 top skills, and then I, in all of my answers, try to communicate that through no matter what the question is. And that's very important.
Always connect back to what is the main things they're looking for. It's like those essays when you're doing like the body paragraph, you've made your argument about one specific thing, and then at the very end of that paragraph you are going to tie it back to your thesis. Always. That's how you make a strong argument. Same idea with interviews is how I kind of approach it. You have your main response to the question. They've asked you a situation-based question or maybe a skill set-based question. You answer it all, and then at the end you always tie it back. This is how this will help me in my role because of so-and-so reason in the posting. Just always tie it back. It's such a great way to like finish off with a bow, and then you're not fumbling at the end of an answer being like, yeah, that's it. Don't end your answers like that.
That's it.
Don't end your answers like that. Finish it off nicely. Another thing that I would recommend is, as Gordon said, you want to think about what their ideal candidate is, like the list of maybe 3-5 qualities that they're looking for, and then levy it with a quality, not necessarily a skill set. It could be a skill set. I usually tend to do it with my personality and what I would bring in terms of soft skills to the team. How do you stand out compared to somebody else who will be applying, who may also be approaching this interview with, okay, they're looking for XYZ, I meet all of that, and that's how I'll do it. You want to throw in like an extra thing that's going to be something only you can bring. And that for me tends to be just a warm personality. I'm very very communicative, super social. And I knew those were things that in one specific job they would have looked for. So I made sure to communicate that through my conversation. I tried to be a little conversational, talk about hobbies and have some jokes here and there to make that obvious. And then other parts are like creativity. I am also an artist on the side. How do I bring that creativity into the work I do as a project management that makes me stand out differently from someone who maybe doesn't have that skill set? So you want to make yourself obviously fit their ideal candidate, but then also twist it in a way like, okay, well, why me versus the next person who also meets all these requirements?
Yeah. And the key thing that you said there, Purva, is not bringing it up randomly. You're still relating it to the role, right? So if it's soft skills, it's not like, yeah, I'm good at talking to people. And then, so you should finish that sentence because I can see in the posting, there's a lot of global partners that we frequently have discussions with. And those skills about problem solving and diplomacy and thing will be very valuable. Therefore, I'm the person. So you always finish your answers like that. Never say that's it.
Yeah. Exactly.
So the question of virtual versus in person interviews are going more in the virtual direction lately. Any thoughts on differences in approach
You want to
to
know a
both when you're
secret?
preparing?
The only time I have done an in-person interview was for a job, my 2 jobs in high school. And so any professional interview I've done has always been virtual. So actually, you might be better suited to answer the in-person prep. I know that the day
Yeah,
that I have to do an
that's funny.
in-person interview, it's going to be a new way of preparing for me.
It's a new
It's going to
experience.
be a
Yeah,
very new experience. So,
yeah,
you know what? I'll learn from you, Gordon, since you
yeah,
predate doing interviews before COVID.
yeah. Yeah, my first interview was 3-person
Oh,
panel.
jeez.
I had to do
Yeah.
a presentation and then do like a written test thing. Craziness. Now, you're going to prepare for your interview, but we'll figure out the salary later because we just need to focus on getting ready for the interview. No. No, 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 no. At any time, you could be caught off guard with a salary question.
Yeah.
Knowing your salary expectations is an important part of job searching. How would you react if asked on the spot? What were you hoping to earn in this position? How would you answer that? So you need to have a basically in the can response to swat those away, or else you'll be startled and say something you shouldn't say. So that can come in the form of like a pre-screen call. That can come like at the end of the interview where you felt like you crushed it, and then they're like, well, how much you want to make? You're like,
Yeah.
right? So you still have to have an idea going in, even though you shouldn't be the one to ask. If asked, you should have an appropriate response to that question.
Agreed, fully. Always prepare for salary questions at any point in this hiring process.
Yeah.
A lot of times they'll ask you when they make you an offer, but they could ask you at the end of an interview. And I also am of the opinion that you shouldn't approach, I mean, you know what? I did initially have the opinion that I should ask at the interview, especially if I was like concerned, but advice. And then obviously from like now having experienced it, it's better just to wait until they bring up the topic. Hold off.
Yeah.
Don't be the one to initiate the topic of salary. It's also best when they come to you with an offer and then you can negotiate because then you have a bit of a levy up, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. We've got a dedicated episode for that one. So don't go anywhere. So now you start the virtual interview because interviews are mostly virtual these days. And we enter the Zoom, the Teams, the WebEx, whatever it is. And hopefully it's not the first time you'd have tested that link or entered the room, because sometimes you have, if it's a different platform, it might require the downloading of a software. Maybe the link that they sent to you wasn't working. Those are a lot of things that you should test ahead of time before your interview time so that you're not flustered. Because if you're flustered, you're off your game and you're not going to perform as well as that you were hoping.
Especially
So
if it's
important to
Zoom.
sort that out.
I don't know if this happens to you, Gordon, but for some reason, no matter how many times I sign into Zoom, it could be every single day, it somehow still
Yeah.
needs an update. And so
Yes.
always try and...
And it loads
I
and
know.
then it's like, and it's like annoying.
Sign in
Yeah.
10 minutes early, so even if there's any issues, you're 5 minutes early, you know?
Yeah. And turn your camera off if you're worried about someone seeing you.
Yeah.
Just test the room. That can't go understated. Going through the interview process naturally can make you feel very nervous, anxious, and uneasy. Preparation can go a long way in helping you overcome this, but sometimes it's not about what you say, it's how you say it. Now, you enter the room, you might be a nervous wreck, you really want the job, or maybe it's your first interview since you finished school and you're like, oh my gosh, I really want to get a job. But what shows on your face has to be a person who is confident, a person that's happy to be here, a person that's happy to share their experiences, and a person that's personable as well. How do you usually approach you click the join button and it's like, oh my gosh, there's 3 people on the panel. What do I say? How do you usually approach that?
So this is what I preach to anybody who asks me how I'm good at networking and talking to people in places I don't know, this, that. I'm like, I am fully cosplaying. I
Oh, that's different.
I seem extroverted, and I am to a certain degree, but usually around people I'm
Oh, I see what you
comfortable
mean.
with. When it comes to networking, it is a scary thing. And I I think I was telling my brother recently, I have to be wearing something that's sweat proof. Otherwise you will see evidence of me being nervous.
Oh no.
But yeah, I think the best way for me is to pretend that I am not stressed or anxious or worried at all. So I just cosplay
Okay.
somebody who's super, super confident, knows they're gonna get the job, and all this type of stuff. It really is just a lot of pep talk. I know that's just a way of you
Yeah.
prepping for it. A few deep breaths, and then you just settle into that character of someone who just, yeah, I'm totally fine. This is just who I am. Otherwise, you wouldn't usually catch me cracking jokes with someone I barely know. But that is how I tend to approach it. You just try on a new personality for a bit. Keep yourself, obviously, still be yourself. You don't want to be someone completely different than what you will be when you start a job, but just be a little confident version of yourself. Just step into that.
So, as much as it sounded maybe ridiculous, it's actually not, because a lot of performers that we know, like entertainers, actually do that. So I know Beyonce has talked before about Sasha Fierce, who's like an alternative personality that's more confident and able to work a stage, and it's not like her natural instinct to behave in that way. Sure, we're not performing in front of hundreds of thousands of people necessarily, but if it's not in your inherent personality to behave a certain way, maybe there's someone that you like who acts a certain way. It doesn't have to be someone famous, someone in your network. Oh, this person's always so confident. I'm going to act like Purva the next time I'm in an interview. And then that's the way that you execute it.
Yeah.
Another way to project confidence, I would say too, is use the names of the people
Yes.
that are on the interview.
Yes.
So you come in, hi Anna, hi Nicole, hi Jeffrey, and they're like, oh wow, that's it. It takes a lot of confidence to just say someone's name confidently.
And also
So
those
do that.
handshakes. If it's in person, you gotta make those handshakes are real nice. Not too.
Make them
Don't
count.
try and crush someone's hand. That's not great. But like a nice firm handshake. Look people in the
Yeah.
eye. I know that's difficult, but it makes a difference. And then also take pauses in your answers. Don't just jump right into it and start, speeding through an answer. Slow it down. Take some pauses. It also gives you a chance to think about your answer. Get yourself a glass of water and sip it after they ask you a question. Have them sit in the question a little bit and then start answering it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From staying hydrated, taking notes, asking to repeat questions, or even having them copied into the chat of your virtual interview, these are all little things that you can do to feel more comfortable and on top of your game while you're doing an interview. Absolutely. And so, water, essential. I try to normalize that when I'm interviewing people by also having my water and saying, let's take a sip break. Like, try to normalize that to make the interview experience a little bit better. And also, don't be afraid to ask to take notes and ask if it's okay to take notes, whether it's you're taking notes of the entire question, key points in the question, maybe you're brainstorming on paper before you respond. Let it play out. Like, unless you ramble on very long, you should have enough time to complete all your interview questions. The time that is allotted to it accounts for all of that. So that's probably a very good approach. And don't be afraid to ask the panelists to repeat questions.
Yeah.
Right? There might be a key part of the question that you misunderstood or you didn't hear, and you think you've answered the question and you moved on and it's a missed opportunity. Maybe you would have had a good response, but you don't know because you don't remember.
Yeah.
So even if it might even be arguable that a good practice is when you feel like you've answered the question, you could ask for it to be repeated, and if nothing else comes to mind, maybe then you move on, right?
Absolutely. I also.
These are scored, right?
Yeah.
So the questions are asked, interviewers are looking for particular things, they're assigned a certain score, and the candidate with the highest score usually is the one that gets the offer. So you don't want to leave any kind of response on the table, right?
Yeah. I also think for accessibility reasons, you can also, especially for virtual, you can always request for the question to be copied into the chat so that you can refer to it.
Yeah.
on the topic of accessibility, every employer, and if you're looking at a good employer, if they don't make interviews accessible for you in whatever your needs are, red flag. Don't even get a job there. But you are within your rights to ask for some accessibility requests, whether that is copying the question into the chat so that you can keep track of it, getting closed captioning for virtual interviews, giving time for you to
Okay.
take notes, things like
That's a
that.
good
I
one.
think that's also very well within your rights to request those things to make sure that you're also set up for success. As Gordon said, you don't want to, these are scored, you don't want to not score well because you were unable to answer certain aspects of a question because you didn't remember it or maybe you didn't hear it. Set yourself up for success. Get the the accessibility needs that you might need for that so that you can make sure you go into it with your best foot forward.
A trap that we often find ourselves in is getting stuck giving a response to a question. And so we ramble on and on and on, and you notice the interviewers aren't even jotting notes down anymore. Remember, they're all human, so don't forget the telltale signs of body language. Purva, I think you did a good job before talking about relating your responses when you're in an interview, right, to the actual job posting. I wanted to circle back to that for a bit with some examples. When you've provided a response to a technical type of question, how would you then approach wrapping up? So we don't want to ramble on for 20 minutes. How do we get ourselves out of that response loop and close it off with a question that's examining our technical skills? So before you answer that, I just want to say too, it's important that you understand why a question is being asked. So if they're asking about, tell us a time about a project that you did and what were the challenges, it's probably because you're going to be doing projects and it's probably because you're going to have challenges and they want to know how you handle that. So knowing the why allows you to then prioritize different things that you include in your response. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when they're specifically asking things like, tell us about a time where you had to, I don't know, balance competing priorities for the various stakeholders on this project or something like that, right? So they're asking for an example or previous experience that you have in doing that, but immediately you should connect, okay, so in this specific job as so and so, I know that in the posting, they have told me that I will be working with a variety of stakeholders from a variety of different sectors, whether that's private, nonprofit, public, whatever. And so you answer with your experience, your example, and you tie it off with, this experience is important because in this position, I expect that I will be doing so and so responsibilities, and it will be incredibly useful to not only have these knowledge and responsibility skill sets, but I'll be able to bring that expertise into this position and essentially be able to have that transition be smooth. Like you come into it with that experience and you relate it immediately to what this specific job is going to be asking you to do. And that is the best way, because then anytime you answer like that, you will see the panel immediately nodding their heads.
I was literally going to say the nod. I was just saying those responses get you the nod, people.
Yeah.
When you start getting the nods and like the I want to smile, but I'm going to try not to smile, then you got them.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head with that, and it's always the nicest. Like the validation you get from those nods and the half smiles are so good because they know then that you understand the job that you are applying for and that you are trying to get into, and that relieves them of the fact of having to explain to you why some certain skill sets are important for this job or why it's needed. It's because you already understand it, and you probably already do because you've applied for this job, but you have to show them that you understand it. They can't read your mind. So very important to communicate that.
Purva, to me, that's actually the most important part of an interview.
Yeah.
What I'm looking for, and I'm sure this applies to many other hiring managers as well, or any other people that are in a position to influence hiring decisions, is when someone demonstrates a clear understanding of what's expected in the position that they're interviewing for, then you'd have done your job effectively. When you demonstrate that you know what it entails. So I can't stress enough how important it is to review your job posting several times before the interview. And if you didn't save it before it expired, sometimes I can tell that people probably haven't saved the posting because they have no idea what the job was
Yeah.
for. That's a travesty.
You have to
Travesty.
save it before you even apply.
Before you even apply.
Yeah.
There we go. And that job posting needs to be looked at sideways, upside down.
Backwards.
Google Translate it to 20 different languages. You need to know that thing inside and outside. Okay? So if you don't take anything out of what myself and Purva have been saying for this whole podcast, is that you need to know the job that you're interviewing for inside and out.
Yeah.
We finished answering questions from the panel, and we're very relieved that it's now done. For virtual interviews, it's so easy to escape the anxiety and the awkwardness. The leave meeting button is just one click away, and it's hard not to resist clicking it. But you hear that voice in your head. I have one more chance to leave a good first impression. But how? Okay, end of the interview. So, Purva, you talked about sweating and oh my gosh, I have to fake that I'm a different person to be confident. And then they're like, oh, that's the end of the interview. Any questions for us? And then there's that impulse to say, no, all right, thanks, bye. Why should we not do that? What should we be doing instead?
Always go into your interview I go in with at least 3 to 4 questions, because sometimes half those questions are answered in the interview because they might give you some background as they're asking you questions, so you might get those answers as you're going. So if you only have 1 question or 2 questions and they're answered, then you're going to be fumbling for something to ask, because you never want to not have a question. In my opinion, always have a question, even if it's just one.
So quick question on that, Purva. I hope you keep expanding on your thought there. Is that because, too, sometimes the questions are so basic that you have that is for sure pretty much going to get answered? And if you don't have, some other questions that are a little bit more complex in the thought, then you'll run out of questions at the end because they would have effectively answered those. So, I liked your point about having 4 and, they're all kind of different questions.
Yeah, sometimes they are basic and so they get answered. Other times it just happens to be that they talk about it themselves. So one of my favorite ones, just because I like knowing what I'm getting myself into, and I have now noticed that these are often answered. When I first applied for jobs, this one wasn't being actually answered in interviews, so I used to ask them that. But I've noticed that hiring managers kind of touch on it in their initial spiel about the job before they start asking questions. And that is, what are the first initial projects that you'll be working on? Or what will be your main focus in this position for the first 3 months as you get settled into the role? And I love asking that question because I want to know, and I want to make sure that I can touch on those points, say get called back for a second interview, or even if it's the last interview, just to prepare myself for the job. But now I'm noticing that the hiring managers answer that in their spiel. So oftentimes that's not a good question to ask anymore because it's answered. So I keep it in there just in case they don't actually answer that. But I've noticed half the time now I never have to ask them that anymore. So it's the more complex questions, something that shows you've done research with the on the organization, and then still connecting it back to the job. So maybe they have their strategic plan up on their website, or they were recently in the news about so-and-so projects. One time I had done I had done the research on the organization, and I asked them, I saw that there's quite a few projects that are on the go right now. There's so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. I listed a few ones that I had in mind. And I said, I was wondering, in this specific role, where do I fit into the success of these projects going forward? And the answer to the question was not what I expected. And the answer was, oh, you won't be involved in those projects. Actually, the projects you're going to be involved in, they're not even visible yet on the website because we're doing them for the first time. And that's one shows that you've done your research on the organization, and it gives them an opportunity to kind of provide you with detail on how you're going to fit into the team, what type of expertise will you be bringing, and, all that. So that was a really surprising answer. I was just like, oh, okay, I guess never mind. But yeah, think it's so important going with at least 3 to 4 questions
Yeah.
lined up to ask them.
Right. I think the context setting for the questions are important, and I think if you didn't frame it the way you did about those projects that you turns out that you're not going to be involved with, it would have been a weird question. If you're like, hey, what's my role in these projects? And you didn't say, oh, I looked at the website, I saw that there's a lot of stuff going on, and and I wondered how it connects. Like, that's the way to ask the question, not just, I know you don't want to ramble on, but in this case, you want to do a little bit of rambling just to showcase that you actually did some research.
Yeah.
I think the number one question that an interview panel will appreciate is if you ask what's the biggest challenge question in a really good way, then it gets people singing and like yap, yap, yap. It gets them talking. Yeah. Because what do we do in the workplace? We talk about challenges that we're trying to solve. So if you can trigger something in their brain to respond to a challenge question, then that's probably the highest value type of question that you can ask. But again, don't just say, hey, what challenges do you have in the workplace? It needs to be framed around something particular that you researched. So for example, if there's a organization doing something in the harm reduction space, right, can be very political, sometimes it makes the news, then you could say, hey, I saw something in the news about some political resistance to some of the programming that we're offering. What kind of challenges does that pose behind the scenes when we don't want any disruption for the clients that we're, and you're going to get, oh my gosh, I lose sleep over that every night. Yeah. And I want to talk to you about that question, right? So that, just by framing it that way, it shows that you're very thoughtful and insightful in terms of what you're bringing to potentially if they hire you.
I also think another really good one is, work-life balance is super important. And it's hard to asking just like, what's the work-life balance like in this position? No, don't do that, because you're not going to really get a truthful answer, to be fully honest.
Or what's the culture like?
Yeah, you're not going to get a truthful answer. They're going to tell you what you want to hear. I think a better way of asking is you're going to know the panel that's like your interview panel beforehand. Try to do some research on them. Find the person who's been there the longest, maybe has had multiple roles. And I love asking them like, oh, hi, John. I saw that you've been at so-and-so company for the last 10 years of your career. I'd love to know what really keeps you here. What is it that you love about this organization and the team that you work with? And that is, I feel like it throws them off guard, obviously, but I think it's such a good way to get an idea of what the team culture is like. Why does John like staying there for 10 years? Is it just the money package, or is it that he likes the people he works with and it's actually a great place for professional development if that's something you're interested in? So I like asking that question too. And they also love chatting about it because they're like, oh my God, how'd you know? And and then they'll be like, oh, I used to, I've been here since I graduated and I started out as an analyst, and look at me now, I'm VP. They'll just go on. So I think that's also a really good way to get an idea of the culture and why someone might like the place. If there's a lot of turnover, you won't get a good answer to that question, and you can have an idea of if that setting is a great one for you or not.
Hot take. Thank you emails are overrated. Just kidding. Not really, but kind of. At the very least, it's something to do as a courtesy. Is there a way to use thank you emails effectively? Or do you think differently about this? The call ends. We're like, whew. So we get up, we're still in our pajama pants, but the upper body has professional clothes on. We take a minute to breathe. And then what should we be thinking about next, Purva? Should we follow up every minute to ask them how it's going? Or what do we say? Do we send a thank you email? Like, how do we do that? What's your opinion on that?
I usually don't do it the same day as the interview. I like doing it the day after, but no more than the day after, in my opinion.
Oh, no more than the day after.
So I know Gordon likes to do a little longer sometimes.
No, I'm curious to hear your thoughts behind this one.
I like when I'm still like, because they're probably interviewing other people, so I don't want them to forget. Like, obviously, I'm hoping I was a memorable interviewer.
Yeah.
But I don't want them to forget who I am. So if I wait more than a
Fair.
day, they're going to be like, oh yeah, who's Purva again? Or, oh, like, I don't want it to be a surprise I'm reaching out like 2-3 days later once they've already moved on from me. And I don't want to be doing it the day of, because I want to sit on the interview, what I answered a little bit more in case.
Reflect on it.
I want to reflect on how I did in case there's a certain question that I want to expand on a little bit in that email, like the follow-up email. And maybe say like, oh, you know, we talked about this briefly. I'd love to provide some more details. Or if there was something like you spoke about a certain output or project that you did and you want to show them what that looked like, maybe you can send them, oh, you know, here's like so-and-so strategic plan that I outlined for this past job, sending you a copy, you know, whatever. Like you want to sit on and reflect on the interview. So I give myself about 24 hours and I send out the email the day after. So right after the interview, I go washroom, obviously, because nervousness, and then take a break from the laptop, and then I start working on that response email, kind of finessing the language, and then I sit on it, and then I usually send it out the day after.
That's fair. So I'll say this. Yeah, I'll go 48 because I want to push it as long as possible to like, if you're like, oh, maybe this candidate, and then it's like, oh, Gordon email. Oh, remember that guy?
Yeah.
So I try to push it as late as possible. But I'll say this is a bit of a hot take. In reality, it doesn't really matter if you send one at all. But it's kind of like a cover letter in that it means more when you don't send it than when you do send it. So if everyone sends a cover letter, it's kind of, whatever. Like, you learn more about the person. But if you're the only one that doesn't send a thank you email, then it looks bad. So if everybody sends a thank you email, no one really gets an edge because they sent a thank you email or what's contained in there. But it looks bad if you didn't send one. So it's always good to send a good thank you email, right?
And most of the time, I usually haven't had anything extra to expand on. So it's really just a thank you so much for your time. It was lovely getting to know you. And like, thank you for taking my interview. It's a very, you can find so many little templates out there for this email.
Yeah,
so
many templates.
It was not too much of an effort.
Yeah. And sometimes if I'm feeling like really good about it, and if it was a good charismatic interview, I'll throw a little risky thing in there, like if we talked about the Raptors at the beginning or something, then I'll put like a PS, by the way, the Raptors suck or something. And like,
what?
Just like if someone on the panel was a hardcore Raptors fan or something, and I want to like get a little giggle out of it. Obviously I won't see them giggle because I'm not there when they read the email. But the whole point is like, oh, wow, it's like a confident person. Like, if that's not in your personality, please don't do that. It's in my personality, so I do things like that when I think it's an appropriate thing to do. But there's many different ways you could take a thank you email, but play it safe most times and send it within, I think Purva might be right about the 24 hours. I do 48 hours, but take your pick. Just make sure you send one.
Don't not. It'll hurt you rather than you sending one.
Yeah. All right, folks. Good luck with your job search.
Good luck.
Bye.
Bye.
This show was edited by me, Gordon Thane, with additional editing from LaShawn Benedict. Sound design and mixing by myself and LaShawn Benedict. The original music from The Music Room, composed by Tom Fox, licensed from Johnny Harris. The cover art designed for our show by LaShawn Benedict. The Public Health Insight Podcast is produced by PHI Media. Thank you for listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for informative conversations, inspiring community action. If you enjoy our podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. See you in the next one.